side of things, rather than getting into the more spiritual and theological side of things. So just wanted to make that clear. Okay. Are you guys able to see this okay?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, so Rome. So we're talking about Rome this week, and the past couple weeks. The Romans conquered this part of the world that is alternately known as Judea, Canaan, Palestine. Today it's the home of occupied Palestine and the nation of Israel. So I'm probably just going to use like Judea and Palestine interchangeably because the Romans called it both. It was the Roman province of Judea and also the province of Palestine at different points in Roman history. So I'm not trying to be political if I don't call it Israel, because honestly, Israel had been decimated as a country, as a kingdom, and then Judea is like where it was happening. Judea was like the southern half of the Jewish ancestral homeland, and Judea gets conquered and turned into a province of Rome. So here it is. So by the time we get to the period that we're talking about, the period of Jesus, Rome, has conquered much of the known world, known to them anyway, and Judea is just another kind of plot of land that they conquered because they could. Like, there's nothing really important happening in Judea. Like, there's really no reason to go out of your way to conquer it. But that's what the Romans do, because they can. So to them, to the Romans, Judea / Palestine is this unimportant backwater of the Roman Empire. Who really cares? One of the methods that they use to maintain control over this kind of far off part of the Mediterranean world is by controlling the Jewish faith. They manipulate control of the Jewish religion from behind the scenes. The Jewish temple, the Temple of Solomon, was the most sacred site. Like all of Judaism revolved around the temple when the temple was still around. And because it was believed that's where God lives, like that's where the physical manifestation of God resides. Now God, Yahweh, the Jewish God, Yahweh resides everywhere. Like he's everywhere. He transcends physical being. He lives in different dimensions. Like there's all kinds of different manifestations of God, but the temple is his home on earth, right? So having access to the Jewish temple is incredibly important for the Jewish faith. And the Romans, when they conquer this part of the world, one way of maintaining control over the Jews in Judea is by getting to decide who's the high priest. So that the high priest of the Jewish faith is appointed by the Roman governor of Judea. And then, so they pick the guy, that is most pliable to Roman interests. And then that guy controls access to the Jewish temple, to the Jewish religious rites and rituals like animal sacrifice and all these things that they believed in at the time. So that's one way that the Romans controlled this part of the world, is by kind of hijacking the religious priestly hierarchy. They also installed a puppet king. So if you're familiar with your Bible, your New Testament, King Herod comes up a few different times, particularly in the story of Jesus. Herod is not a very popular guy, and that's because he's an outsider. His family, I think that's how it goes, his family converted to Judaism when he was a kid, but they're actually like, their origins are Greek or something in nature, and they're outsiders. Like they're not native Jews, they're not native Hebrew Jews, and so, but they're flexible enough to swear fealty to Rome. Rome rewards Herod and his family, and Herod is appointed king of Judea. He doesn't really have much real power. It's all the Roman governor. But nonetheless, this is cause for frustration if you're Jewish. There's a puppet king in charge. The Romans are pulling the strings. They control the temple. And if you're a Jew living in Roman era Palestine, you're pissed off. So it's not surprising then that by the time we get to Jesus and the development of early Christianity, there's this fervor that's gripped the land of Judea. There's all these apocalyptic prophecies. There's guys running around. The territory is full of angry zealots who are willing to revolt against the Roman Empire and die for the cause of Jewish sovereignty. There are prophets, a dime a dozen, running around making predictions about the end of, not only the end of Roman rule, but the end of the world. There's this talking about a savior who's going to deliver the Jewish people. There's all kinds of Old Testament verses that can be interpreted in that manner. So that's the context for, I just want to set up a little bit, and I'm generalizing a lot here. But that's the context for when we get Jesus. And again, I'm going to talk about the historical figure of Jesus today and the historical nature of Christianity, not any kind of spiritual context, because that's up to you guys to decide how you approach your own lives in that sense. So, Jesus of Nazareth is what he's known as. This figure of Jesus was, the story goes that he's born in Bethlehem in a manger, in kind of this barn context, according to the Christmas story. But he's raised in Nazareth. Nazareth is like the armpit of like if Roman Palestine is a backwater that no one cares about, Nazareth is the backwater of the backwater. It's like the state of Mississippi. Like no one cares about it. You don't go out of your way to go there. You want to leave as soon as possible. Sorry if that's offensive to anyone. I don't know. Probably not, right? We reside safely in the Union. We can make fun of the Confederacy. But I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. So anyway, so it's interesting that Jesus is from this backwater of backwaters because he's a working class guy. His dad is a carpenter. He has a working class background. And so when he decides to go on a kind of a tour of Judea, as a teacher, he's kind of this, much like other people at the time, he's this traveling rabbi or traveling teacher of the Jewish faith. And what sets Jesus apart is he's not formally trained in the priestly hierarchy. Like you're supposed to go through all this training and education. And, by all accounts, Jesus probably didn't know how to read or write. He's from Nazareth. Very poor place, has no formal education, and yet he's an extremely charismatic and popular figure. So in his late 20s, early 30s, or thereabouts, this guy from the middle of nowhere undertakes this ministry, I guess what we would call it, or this kind of teaching tour of the territory of Judea. It's about 1 to 3 years. The Bible traditionally has it as 3 years, but that's up for debate, whatever. And he goes around and he preaches messages of moral fortitude, of hope. His audience is the other poor people, the other peasants of Judea. He's not a rich guy talking to other rich people. He's going directly to the masses. And one of the most emblematic parts of Jesus's ministry is the Sermon on the Mount, which is covered in the book of Matthew. And this is where he talks about, instead of hating your enemies, pray for them. Instead of punching someone when they punch you, you turn the other cheek. Let them punch you twice. Like that's showing God's mercy. That's being a manifestation of God's love. He says, blessed be the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Like not the powerful, not the rich and wealthy, but you guys, the salt of the earth, the peasants, like you have the true grace of God living in you. So there's this message of hope and egalitarianism that's preached to the masses of Judea. Now, he gets in trouble because he's kind of a classist. He says like, blessed be the poor people, but it's the rich who are going to have trouble getting into heaven. And he constantly is poking and prodding at the priestly class, the ones that hold power over the Jewish people under the thrall of Rome. Like they're collaborators with Rome. They're oppressing the poor people. They're punching down, and he's constantly poking and making fun of and antagonizing the priestly class of the Jewish people, and this gets him into trouble. Right? He is eventually executed by the Roman governor of Judea at the behest of the priests, the high priests of Judaism, because they see Jesus as a threat to their own power. He's very popular. He's getting a lot of people on board. We need to kill this guy before he stirs up too much trouble. And the Romans are happy to oblige, and they execute him by way of crucifixion, which is a Roman style of execution that's reserved for traitors to the Roman state and kind of the worst rabble rousers. And so there's a sign posted above Jesus's cross, as the story goes, INRI, which is a Latin abbreviation for "Here is Jesus, King of the Jews," kind of making fun of him in his last moments, his last dying breaths, saying, you thought this guy was a leader, a popular guy. Well, now he's hanging from a cross. He's going to die. After this, and again, I'm only sticking to the historical Jesus here, right? I just want to reiterate that. After this, Jesus becomes a martyr. He becomes a hero who died for what he believed in the minds of many Jews. A subsect of those Jews, eventually this is where Christianity comes from, but a subsect of the Jews that admired Jesus and followed him and looked up to him, they believe that he was this Messiah figure that the Old Testament, that the Torah had been talking about, that people were running around, prophets were out, talking about the end of days or the end of Roman rule. Like they believe that Jesus was this Messiah, and the fact that he died doesn't change that, because according to them, he wasn't there to save us from the Romans. He was there to save our souls. He was a Messiah of the soul, not a Messiah of throwing off the yoke of Roman rule. So that's the germs of Christianity. Like that's where the root of Christianity lies, is in Jesus as a martyr, someone who died intentionally to cover the sins of humanity. And by the way, Jesus becomes seen as a son, as God incarnate. And this is partly inspired because Jesus himself went around kind of implying that. A lot of portions of the Bible, like he doesn't come out and say, "I'm God," but he heavily implies that a lot of the time. He calls himself the Son of Man, which is a very loaded term and all this stuff. So anyway, after Jesus dies, a few decades pass, and the Jews get so stirred up and riled up about Roman rule, they eventually launch this short-lived revolt in 66 AD or CE, whatever your flavor of time. And there's my wife. She is very interested in learning as well.
I love learning.
Come join the class. We're learning about Columbus Day and Jesus. It's awesome.
Columbus. Boo.
Boo, Columbus. That's right. She's married to a historian. So anyway, we get the Jewish revolt, which ends in the destruction of the Jewish temple, which is a huge crisis. That's a calamity for the Jewish people. Like that's where God lived. That was the most sacred thing. And that was the center of their organized religion, was the Temple of Solomon. It is destroyed in 70 CE. And this causes so much widespread devastation of Judaism, of occupied Palestine. This causes a lot of Jews to just fan out and leave the homeland. And they're either compelled to or forced to or voluntarily leave. This is called the Jewish diaspora. This is why we get Jewish communities in places like modern day Iraq, um, in like Jordan, in other parts of the Middle East, Egypt. There's a big Jewish community in Egypt, in Ethiopia, in East Africa. Lots of Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, Poland, Germany, which doesn't turn out too well, Hungary, Ukraine, Russia. This is why we have big Jewish populations living in Miami Beach, Florida, and New York City. Like, this is all part of the Jewish diaspora, where after the destruction of the temple and the putting down of the revolt against Rome, the Jewish people spread out all across the world to this day. So in this kind of context of a broken, shattered Jewish homeland that not only is still occupied by Rome, but now the temple's gone, out of that kind of rubble starts to emerge different branches of Judaism. One of them becomes Christianity, basically, right? And it's led by this guy named Paul. Paul is a guy, he's oh my gosh, he's so important to the development of Christianity. Most of the New Testament consists of letters written by Paul to the various Christian communities around the Mediterranean. So he ends up writing most of the New Testament. Paul was a Jew who was also a Roman citizen. His family was influential in Roman, like local territorial Roman politics. Paul himself was educated. He was a guy educated in the Greek and Roman tradition, and he has a Roman citizenship, which allows him to travel around the Roman Empire. He spends the early years of his career persecuting Christians. He takes the part in killing early Christians who split off from Judaism and believed that Jesus was the Messiah. But he himself converts to Christianity around 37 CE. And this is before the destruction of the temple. But he becomes kind of an early advocate for Christianity. Like this idea that Jesus was actually the Son of God, he was part God, and he died to cover the sins of humanity. Jesus was the Messiah, and Paul buys into this idea, and he ends up spreading it around the Roman Empire because he's a Roman citizen. He has a passport where he can travel wherever he wants in Roman territory, and he's protected by local Roman authorities wherever he goes. Now, this ends up getting him in trouble because he's actually spreading a heresy, according to Rome, and Paul ends up being crucified and dies in Rome itself. But before that happens, he goes around and he preaches the good news of Jesus. He's like the first missionary, of Christianity. Part of why I call this the codifying of Christianity is Paul ends up writing a lot of the early guidelines and rules for what it means to believe in Jesus. So Paul wrote that Jesus died, but he was resurrected from the dead. But believing in that resurrection automatically means that you are a favored son or daughter of God, and you are saved. Your soul is saved by believing in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's one of Paul's early, he writes about this constantly in his letters to the early church. And this is super important, guys. I cannot stress this enough. This runaway branch of Judaism splits off entirely from Judaism, and it says, you know what? You don't have to be a Jew. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be, it doesn't matter what your race or your class or your Roman status. It doesn't matter. Anyone can believe in this miracle of Jesus and have their soul saved. This religion is for everybody. And that is crucial. That is so important to understanding all of this. Is Paul, from the get-go, helped make Christianity a universal religion, where people in China and America and Inuits living, up near the North Pole. Like anybody can accept this idea and become a favored son or daughter of God. That's crucial because Judaism was a very kind of inclusive or exclusive, I should say, exclusive faith. And Christianity says, no. Like, you don't have to be born a Jew to adhere to this. Like, you can be anybody and be saved, right? There's ambiguities within this idea of salvation and what you have to do during your mortal lifetime to deserve to get up to heaven. And the Bible is open-ended on a lot of these kind of theological questions. So, for instance, there's this from the book of Ephesians, which is in the New Testament. It says, for by grace you're saved through faith, not that of yourselves, it's a gift from God, not of works, lest any man should boast. In other words, simply believing in Jesus gets you to heaven. But contrast that with another book of the Bible, James chapter 2, later on. See now that by works a man is justified, not by faith alone. And so in other words, James is saying, it's not enough just to believe in Jesus. You have to live a good life. You have to do good things while you're alive on this earth. You can't just whore around and cheat and lie and steal and go up to heaven. Like, you have to actually do good things. Like Jesus set the example of living a good life. You have to do that and believe in Jesus to get up to heaven. So there's this, and that becomes tricky. Once this becomes an organized religion, there's debates within the Catholic Church about like how many good works do you need to do to get up to heaven, and then Protestantism comes along later and says no, you don't need to do any good works, and like they're all pointing to the same Bible, but they're just pointing to different parts of it, and this becomes an issue over that we still haven't resolved. So, any questions so far? I know I'm getting into the weeds a little bit about this stuff, but I think it's important to understand. Any questions at all? Okay. If you think of anything, let me know. Again, I'm only trying to come at this from the perspective of a historian, because it is interesting to look at it from a non-faith tradition, looking at it from an empirical tradition. It's two very interesting perspectives to compare. The Gospels form the early kinds of core of trying to understand who Jesus was, because it's called Christianity because they believe that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah. And so in order to fully kind of wrap our minds around the rules and guidelines of this new faith, you got to understand who Jesus is. And so after Paul, there starts to be written down accounts of Jesus's life. Because Jesus is the star of the show here, we got to know who this guy was. But we don't get the first actual recordings, written records of Jesus till after Paul is dead. The stories of Jesus come later on. Like after Jesus is dead, after Paul is dead, like the Gospels, these stories of Jesus come later. Which is interesting. That gives us an interesting historical problem. So Mark is actually the first one to be written. In the New Testament, it goes Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. So it's kind of confusing that Mark is actually the first one to be written down. It was compiled around 70 CE, so about 40 years after the death of Jesus, or the earthly death of Jesus. It includes no narrative of where Jesus came from. Like there's no Christmas story included in this gospel. There's also very little detail about the resurrection. So it mostly focuses on Jesus's ministry. And to complicate this even more, there are different versions of Mark. So one of them, and it's the one that's included in most Bibles, actually talks about the death and resurrection of Jesus. But the earliest versions of Mark don't talk about this at all. It's just about the stories that Jesus told, the moral lessons that he imparted to his disciples. It just focused on the life of Jesus. around 30 or so CE. And then we get Matthew and Luke, which are written around the same time, but independently from each other. This comes a good 20 or 30 years after Mark is written. So we're already a couple generations removed from Jesus. This is where we start to see the Christmas story, Jesus being born in Bethlehem. This is where we get full accounts of the resurrection of Jesus and him appearing to his disciples after he comes back to life. There's more detail included that Mark kind of leaves out. But Matthew and Luke contradict each other in certain ways, which is kind of that's always a problem that theologians have to sort of try and wrestle with. And then John is the odd man out because he comes almost a whole century after the life of Jesus. John is really, it's an interesting gospel because it's got a lot more fun stories that aren't included in the other three gospels. This is where Jesus turns water into wine at the wedding. It's his first miracle. He turns water into wine at a wedding reception, and everyone's like, holy crap, this is good wine. And Jesus is like, yeah. Jesus brings someone back from the dead in the book of John. So it's kind of it's an odd gospel because it includes more miracles and more kind of supernatural components than you see in the other gospels. And it's written in a more literary kind of storytelling kind of style. But taken together, these are the four main, what are called canonical gospels. These are the accepted official stories of Jesus. There are other gospels as well that are written around the same time or later, but they're not seen as like official canon. They're not included in the Bible. You can't open up a Bible and find these stories. You have to go online and find them. Some of them haven't not been discovered until as recently as like the 1940s. Or, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you've heard of those. Those were ancient writings that were only very recently discovered. And some of them are crazy. Like there's a Gospel of Mary. There's a Gospel of Judas, the guy who betrays Jesus and gets him killed. But they're not considered official Christian scriptures. So anyway, the ambiguity of all these texts, the dates that they were written, much later than the life of Jesus, the different contradictions and the different versions that are told about the life of Jesus, all of these mean, I'm not here to reconcile this stuff. Like I'm not, like that's, there's been centuries of theologians that have tried to reconcile these things. I'm not going to do that here. Simply what I'm trying to say is Jesus means different things to different people. Christianity is a very open-ended religion. Like there's a lot of open questions that are asked and not a lot of firm answers. Contrast this with the very strictness of like Orthodox Judaism. Contrast this with some parts of Islam, which shares a faith tradition with Judaism and Christianity. Christianity is way more flexible as an organized religion than most mainstream faiths. We'll talk about heresies as we go on, but there's different ideas of what Jesus meant and like what it takes to get into heaven. There are literally like over 10,000 denominations of Christianity today. So the rules and guidelines are very flexible. They're very up in the air about what it means to be a Christian and to believe in Jesus. Like it takes lots of different forms. And what the right one is just kind of depends on what your perspective is. There are a few things that all kind of Christian sects or denominations have in common. One is a belief in two different worlds. There's a natural world that we can see and interact with, and I can drink water out of this bottle that I can pick up. And then there's a supernatural world that is beyond the scope of human understanding. There's like an alternate dimension where there lives where like heaven is. where God and Satan are constantly in constant struggle with one another. The forces of good and evil are in struggle, and those forces, those light and dark forces, will spill out into the natural world. So Christians do believe that, and this is generalizing, heavily generalizing here, that there's such a thing as temptation from evil forces. Usually that takes the form of Satan or demons. Satan is the main bad guy in, the story of Judeo-Christianity and eventually Islam as well. Satan's this like ultimate demon who's just a bad guy and he spreads bad things. But he doesn't live on earth. Like, you can't go up and like punch Satan in the face. He resides in like the supernatural realm. And so do the angels, so does God. Christians believe generally in the sacred power of words and objects. The ritual is very important in some parts of Christianity, particularly the Eucharist, or as Protestants call it, communion. And that's where you symbolically take part in the Last Supper that Jesus had before he died. So you take some bread and some wine or juice, and you take it, and that is a ritualistic kind of cleansing of your soul, or at least an acknowledgement that Jesus died to cover your sins. Catholics will go one step further and say, literally consuming the bread and the wine is consuming like the literal, like it turns into the blood and body of Christ as soon as it hits your mouth. That's called transubstantiation. It's a miracle that happens when you consume these substances. Now, so again, the different rules, different strokes for different folks here. But nevertheless, rituals like this, prayer is extremely important in every aspect of Christianity. These words and rituals are very, very important to Christian tradition. What else? There's a heavy emphasis on the individual experience. Yes, you go to Mass or you go to church and you take part in these rituals with other believers, but what Christianity means to you as a person is heavily up to your own individual experience with the divine. So this is set forward in the writings of Paul in the New Testament, talking about how he prays, how he is constantly trying to draw himself closer to understanding God in a personal, experiential way. The martyr called Perpetua is an early Christian woman who writes about her experiences of prayer and getting visions from Jesus. That's one of the documents you're reading for this week is Perpetua and how she dies in a Roman Colosseum, being executed by the Romans for believing in this wacko new religion, and she's strangely fine with it. So this individual experience and how you encounter the divine is very important. And again, I want to reiterate that it's early Jews that kind of form Christianity, but from the get-go, Paul says you don't have to be an ex-Jew. You don't have to be circumcised and grow up in the Jewish faith to be a Christian. In fact, it's open to Jews and Gentiles alike. It's open to literally anybody. It's a universal faith. And this is what makes it so powerful, is it's not just this regional cult that develops in the backwater of backwaters. It's this experience that anyone is invited to participate in. And that makes it very powerful, and it makes it very attractive to a lot of people over time. So, okay, last slide. Christianity becomes victorious in the long run and the short run. Like it catches like wildfire. Lots and lots of early church communities, early Christian communities pop up around Palestine. They pop up in Greece, in Rome itself. The Roman Empire serves as an incubator for this new faith. And because Paul is able to walk around and spread the news of Jesus, it catches on pretty quick. But it's not really quite prepared for its success because it's a plane that's being built while it's flying. Like, again, Christianity by its own nature is very open-ended about a lot of its beliefs. So early Christian leaders have a lot of different opinions on how we should organize this new religion, what are the theological details that we need to iron out. One of the big ones is, how do we reconcile God and Jesus with each other? Are they the same person or the same being? Is Jesus a mortal who was born and then became the Son of God? Or was he Son of God from the beginning? Or like, you know, and then there's also the Holy Ghost. So there's like the problem of the Trinity. Like, how can God be three things in one? You know, like and so like this drives a lot of people nuts, and there's a lot of meetings and arguments about what exactly are the details of Christianity, because it's just so fluid. There's a lot of debate about organization of the very structure of the Christian church. Should it be a local thing? Should it be headquartered in Judea, because that's where Jesus was? Should it be governed by church leaders, or should it be just left up to like individual communities to decide how they want to approach the question of Jesus? What's the relationship of the church with political power? Who gets to control what happens in the faith? In the Roman Empire, the Roman emperor is the head priest of the Roman religious organization. Should we try later when Christianity becomes not illegal? The question is like, should we trust the emperor, the Roman emperor, to decide the rules of Christianity? Or should we entrust more like church leaders, like bishops and priests, to do this? In other words, is this a government religion? Like, do we separate, church and state here? Or is it one and the same? There's a lot of questions on just the basic teachings, just in general. Is there one like core truth of Christianity? Are there many different truths? Are there many different perspectives? And this is where we get the development of what's called orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is like the very strict rules that you cannot break outside of. The early orthodoxy becomes the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church emerges as the orthodox mode of doing Christianity. However, on the fringes, there are also lots of other ideas that conflict with Catholic teachings, and these are deemed as heresies. It's interesting that the first emperor to accept Christianity, his name is Constantine. Constantine comes a few centuries after Jesus. Like this religion takes a long time to establish in an official way, but it's deemed as illegal for like a long time. But Constantine the Great converts to Christianity, and your readings will cover this, and he extends toleration to Christians. And eventually Christianity becomes the official religion of Rome. But all these kind of questions come to a head of like, who gets to control the religion? How centralized should it be? What is considered orthodoxy? And Constantine calls together this Council of Nicaea, it's called, where a bunch of bishops and the emperor himself attend, and they decide what the rules of Catholicism are. And people are deemed heretics. People who are kind of, political rivals are deemed heretics, and they have to leave the church, or they're faced with punishment. So over the course of 300 years, Christianity goes from the small like subsect of Judaism to a global religion, because the Roman emperors themselves convert and accept Christianity, and in fact make it the official state religion of Rome. All within, a few centuries. And that's how Christianity takes off. That's how it becomes established. Is the Roman Empire becomes an incubator for this new religion, and eventually it takes more hardened form. It has more firm rules, at least for now, and then things get crazy later on. But Christianity emerges out of the Roman Empire, in pretty much every sense of the word. But it's not a Roman faith. It becomes a Roman faith later. But it starts out as a Jewish subsect and becomes eventually this kind of global religion by the strength of its adherents and just a lot of time, a lot of time and a lot of martyrs. So, any questions about any of this or comments? I know it's a lot, but it's kind of important.
I have more of like a abstract question.
Yeah.
But so in the future, this religion and politics are going to be heavily connected because people are going to use the religion as a basis for political action.
Yeah.
So are you going to talk about both of those things in like separate contexts and connect them, or are you going to try and reference both of them at the same time?
Yeah, I'm gonna try and reference both at the same, because like the development of the church, what people find attractive about Christianity and all this stuff, it cannot be separated from the politics. Like even as you read about it in your readings for this week, Constantine he legalizes Christianity as a result of politics. Like politics are infused into Christianity from the very get-go. And it's hard to separate those things, but I want to talk about, I'll try and talk about them in different contexts as we go on. I mean, basically from here on out, like when the Roman Empire collapses, just assume that Christianity is the main religion in the West because it is. Like it becomes that, and it just stays that way. But people will constantly reference different Christian ideas as a means of politically trying to push their own agendas. Feudal lords will do this. Charlemagne will do this. When we get to the Crusades, my God, the Crusades, a very political thing, incredibly political. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It kind of does, yeah. You answered the question I asked.
So yeah, I'll be trying to, as best I can, talk about religion as in a historical context, because that's my job. All right. Any other questions before we go? You guys have been awesome.
I have a comment that I think everyone would appreciate.
Okay.
I am actually in a church right now.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I've been in a church this whole time.
So this is history, being played out right here in Stephanie's Zoom background.
There's a sign saying I love Jesus and everything.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, walk around downtown Springfield and you'll find evidence of the staying power of this weird little Jewish cult that has stuck around and become something quite different for a long time. All right. Oh, that's fun. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, let me know. The quiz is, just due by Friday. You guys have an easy quiz week. I'll try and get to your papers as soon as I can. I'm doing a lot of traveling this week for various things, so I'll get to your papers from last week when I can. But in the meantime, I hope you guys have a great week. I hope I didn't offend anyone with my Mississippi comments, and I'll see you guys on Friday.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.